Hello and welcome to the Mystery School channel. This is your brother disciple, Vito Corleone, and today we have our first lesson on personal magnetism. Throughout history, it has been called magic, the science of the Magi, as well as the Hermetic science of personal magnetism. And in this video, I will introduce this topic as well as show that both of these things, the science of the Magi and the Hermetic science of personal magnetism, are indeed the same. I am producing this series because some viewers requested that I do a video teaching how to do magic. However, since that is quite the complicated subject, I decided to do a video series instead of just one video to break down all of the different aspects of magic into their individual parts and go through them piece by piece, and then do a video putting all of the pieces together. But regardless of which path that you are on, all of them use personal magnetism. And even if you're not interested in magic specifically, personal magnetism is a part of your life in every situation. I would like to help people both in their daily life with the use of personal magnetism, as well as the use of the electromagnetic energy while casting spells, so that people could better utilize all of the books that they've collected. As most books nowadays, for example, Chaos Magic right here, have started to recognize this trend towards personal magnetism, as this is what the initiates of the mystery schools have taught throughout history. And in other cultures, they have different names for this. It's called Pneuma, Ruach, Chi, Ki, Mana, Prana, Spiritus, Lung, Vril, and many other names. This first lesson on personal magnetism will introduce the topic as well as provide definitions for the terms that we will be using in this field of study, as a philosopher and scientist should. Then, in the second part of this video, I will trace the idea of magnetism and the aura throughout history. But first, let's define our term. Our aura is the same thing as our electromagnetic energy. Personal magnetism is the subconscious use of the electromagnetic energy, and magic is usually the conscious use of this electromagnetic energy. However, there are many people that use the term personal magnetism in society, and they do not mean magic. And so I'd like to talk about both the conscious use of one's personal energy in the average everyday situation. And then I would also like to talk about using one's personal energy intentionally during magic. And of course, if you didn't know, magic in this context means ceremonial magic. Personal magnetism is usually defined as a personal attractiveness or interestingness that enables someone to influence others. Synonyms include charismatic, a personal appeal, enchanting, mesmeric, alluring, captivating, charming. See also sexual allure. However, my personal favorite and the one that I think fits the best synonym is personal energy. But to give the viewer an introductory perspective on what it means to understand the concept of personal magnetism, I chose these two pictures of these people in the bottom center. The left one is Wonder Woman, and the right one is some guy I found on the internet. If you are attracted to these people, I would like you to stare at the picture that you are attracted to, and I'd like you to not focus on the picture itself, but the feeling that you have. And that feeling of being attracted to their magnetism is really what we want to focus on in this channel, because that feeling that they're giving off is what we want to cultivate in everyone, so that everyone has their own personal energy, their own personal magnetism that everyone can feel anytime that they experience that human. I will talk about this topic from both the perspectives of theory and practice of personal magnetism, and both the average scenarios of everyday life and ceremonies and magic rituals. Most books talk about personal energy as the key to the mysteries. For example, in this book on Thelema and this book on paganism. On the left, we have a quote from the book The Egyptian Tarot of Thelema. And in the description of the priestess, it says, her figure and arms, raised up in simultaneous invocation and evocation, express the lunar form. Her face and body are effulgent with the silvery moon glow or magnetism of the path. And this is coming from Oliver St. John, a modern Thelemite and a founder of the Order Astery Mystery School. And he is saying verbatim that to do invocation and evocation, one needs to control the polar currents of the electromagnetic energy. And then over here on the right, we can see that Raymond Buckland, in his book, The Complete Book of Witchcraft, in lesson 13, is talking about using the aura and prana for healing. This topic is so huge that Dion Fortune, the founder of the Society of Inner Light, wrote her entire book, The Principles of Hermetic Philosophy, to just discuss the aura and the electromagnetic energy and how it interplays with the rest of the mystery school teachings. However, I would say that the best book on the topic is Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics. In this book, the author talks about how the fire principle in Western occultism represents the electrical fluid and material electricity. And then he also says that the water element in Western occultism represents the magnetic fluids and material magnetism. And after reading both this book, Initiation into Hermetics, as well as the previous book, The Principles of Hermetic Philosophy by Dion Fortune, everything started to click together. And I really started to put all the pieces together. And in doing so, I formulated a definition that I would really like to share. As you will soon see, it's not like your average definition of magic that doesn't reveal very much. And so I will read through the definition and briefly talk about it, and then I'm going to explain the different aspects of the definition, because this definition will frame the field of study for the rest of the videos that I come out with on the Hermetic science of personal magnetism. And so it's really important that we understand this definition, because it really does help people use their personal magnetism and their personal energy in all scenarios. So let's get into it. On the bottom right, we have a picture of the Kirlian photography capturing someone's aura. On the bottom left, we have a picture of someone and their aura. In the middle left, we have a picture of the book, The Secret. And then in the middle right, we have a picture of tuning forks. Through Kirlian photography, we can irrefutably prove that everybody has an aura. In Dion Fortune's books, The Principles of Hermeticism and The Circuit of Force, she articulates the argument that we use our auric energy for magic. Science has proven that the properties of electromagnetic energy is attraction and repulsion. Therefore, understanding the science of polarity underpinning the law of attraction and the law of repulsion through manipulating the electromagnetic energy, the aura, is the phenomena of real magic. Accordingly, each person is a human talisman that can charge and discharge energy, transmitting sympathetically like human tuning forks. The main technique used is speech, which is why all magic is rooted in speech, and is also the reason why practical Kabbalah is magic. Thus, it logically follows that music is the highest form of magic and magnetism. So just in case you didn't know, the Kirlian photography mentioned here and pictured on the bottom right of the screen was invented by a Russian scientist by the name of Semyon Kirlian, who in the late 1930s and early 1940s invented a type of photography that he used to capture the phenomenon of electrical coronal discharges, which simply means that because it's electricity making up the electromagnetic energy, and we use electricity for light, obviously we can take a picture of it. And so I will be going through each one of the different aspects of the definition, but for the most part, this will just be an introduction, and I will be making individual videos on each one of these ideas so that we can fully understand how important it is. The first aspect that we're going to talk about is polarity, which is also arguably the most important aspect. Everyone has heard of the law of attraction, as it's probably the most popular spiritual trend today. But there is also a lesser known law called the law of repulsion that balances and polarizes the law of attraction. Polarity represents the complementary forces of the universe, which is completely different than dualism. The word duel really is indicative of a fight. It really harkens back to the medieval times when knights would duel each other for titles of honor. And it even goes further back to ideologies like Zoroastrianism that had a dualist philosophy regarding good versus evil, light versus darkness, Angra Mainyu versus Ahura Mazda, as completely different than polarity. Polarity is usually understood by the most popular symbol, the yin-yang, which shows that the polar forces are in balance and harmony. Polarity regarding balance and harmony is completely different than dualism, which is opposition and strife. Complementary means working together, whereas opposition means fighting. And so in that regard, we really need to understand that polarity is the complementary forces that balance and harmonize the universe. It is the electricity and magnetism that makes up you, me, and the rest of the universe. I will use the terms yin and yang, as well as sun and moon, to represent these polar forces of electricity and magnetism, as that is what these symbols were used throughout history for the mystery school teachings. Polarity really is the most important thing in regards to magic because, as we can see from the picture on the top right of the screen, polarity controls attraction and repulsion. If someone wants to attract something into their life or repel something out of their life, they need to control the polarity. And only by performing in harmony with these laws of polarity can we actually use our magnetic energy the way we really desire to. This is why books like The Magus by Francis Barrett talk about occult sympathies and occult antipathies, as well as Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy talk about occult virtues. We will discuss this in a little bit. There are even more aspects to polarity. For example, Oliver St. John talks about horizontal and vertical polarity. The next aspect of polarity is the charge and discharge process that we will get into in a second. But I cannot stress how crucial polarity is in regards to personal magnetism in both the average everyday scenarios of life as well as while performing ceremonies or magic rituals. So let's move on to the next aspect of the human talisman, using matter as a cosmic instrument. So pictured here on the bottom left of the screen, we can see what really looks like a human talisman. So for those people who don't really know, a talisman, or sometimes an amulet, is a magical item that is charged up with a specific intention. Usually this is a necklace or other small wearable jewelry, but not all of the time. And so once we understand what using matter as a cosmic instrument fully entails, then we can understand we can charge ourselves to be a human talisman. So repeat after me. Using matter as a cosmic instrument. Using matter as a cosmic instrument. Okay, what does that mean? All material things have a receptive capability. This is how we can create amulets and talismans in the first place, is that we can charge these material objects using their receptive capability. Thus, we can use it as a cosmic instrument. And so what I would really like to emphasize is that once we understand that this is all material things, we can understand how to program the human and the human aura to act exactly like a real talisman does. And so in that regard, I'd really like you to think about how all material things are a cosmic instrument that can be used through the charge and discharge process, which is the next aspect. The charging and discharging process is entirely concerned with personal energy and personal energy cultivation. Energy cultivation is really under the study of alchemy, and in the Hermetic Science of Personal Magnetism series, I will deal with the Hermetic side of magic, and in my internal alchemy series that I will produce in the future, I will deal with the Hermetic side of alchemy. But we really need to understand that we need to have the battery power behind our spells, and this charging process of energy cultivation is done through internal alchemy, and only by having energy behind our spells can we actually have the power to manifest them. And then once we have that energy, we must properly discharge that energy. Otherwise, it will, of course, be a misfire. And so in that regard, charging and discharging is essential. And so I will deal with those topics in depth in further videos. But for now, let's move on to using tuning forks or sympathetic vibrational transmission. So what I'm saying here is not that we need to use tuning forks in our rituals and daily practices, but that we need to understand the principles behind tuning forks. So tuning forks are the fork-shaped object here on the bottom left hand of the screen. And essentially what tuning forks are is they're used for essentially tuning. When you strike the object, it will resonate at a certain vibration. And if you have multiple tuning forks, say you have one tuning fork in each one of your hands, and you strike one of the tuning forks, making it vibrate, but you don't strike the other one, you will notice that the other tuning fork that you didn't strike starts to vibrate. And this is understanding the sympathetic vibrational transmission of resonance. And this is absolutely essential when doing magic. So I'm going to briefly explain what sympathy is, and then we'll move on. So sympathy is defined as understanding between people and a common feeling. Why is that so important and in magic and personal magnetism? It's because that's how music works, that's how our feelings work, and that's how magic works. When someone plays a song, it changes the environment. The perfect example that I can think of is when we are watching movies and they pick a specific song for a fight scene, or they pick a specific song for a crying scene. When you are experiencing that, you have your mood changed if you are sympathetic, if you are in a state of mind that can relate. And if you're in a state of mind that can relate, then you have your vibration change through resonance. And the perfect example that I would like to illustrate for you guys is the song Layla by Eric Clapton. If you have not heard that song, go look it up. If you haven't heard that song in a while, go look it up. Okay? When you hear the first beats of that song, turn up the volume because it's incredible. But then when you get about halfway into the song and the beat completely changes to the slow, mellow, relaxing rest of the song, that completely changes the mood, the environment. And so in that regard, we really need to understand that when we use our speech, we are creating sympathetic vibrational transmissions. That is why we use speech in magic. It's because we can create these vibrational transmissions with our words. And this also applies, of course, anytime someone's using their words, but specifically when we're working with magic. And so when we understand polarity and sympathetic vibrational transmissions, then you can tune your magnetic field to match what you want to attract and bring that into your life. Another reason that we use speech in magic is because of cymatic tones. If you don't know what cymatic tones are, you can go ahead and look them up. They're usually someone taking sand or some other small particle, placing it on a plate that they can vibrate. And once they vibrate this plate at a specific frequency, it changes the particles into a geometric shape. And here you can see on the bottom right of the screen this exact experiment being done and some of the geometric shapes that can be created. And what this proves is that through our speech, we are actually shaping reality. We are participating in the creation of reality. And that's the whole goal of casting a magic spell. When someone does that, the purpose is to bring that idea into fruition, to bring that spell into reality, to create a reality where that spell has worked. And so when we understand how vibration and frequency objectively change reality in specific ways and shapes, then we can truly proficiently use our words to get exactly what we want. And it may not be words, it may just be vibrations. But for the most part, that's the basic introduction to this definition. And really, to summarize it, everything here is really for theory and practice. This definition is more of a thesis than a definition, but it shows that magic is not irrational, it is scientific. Because what I'm saying here is that we all have a magnetic field that attracts things into our life, regardless of whether or not we know this or accept this. And the whole point of studying personal magnetism is to become proficient in our use of personal energy. And so in that regard, I would like to read the definition one more time before we move on to the next part of the video, which is to trace these ideas throughout history. And so in this regard, Through Kirlian photography, we can irrefutably prove that everybody has an aura. In Dion Fortune's books, The Principles of Hermetic Philosophy and The Circuit of Force, she articulates the argument that we use our auric energy for magic. Science has proven that the properties of electromagnetic energy is attraction and repulsion. Therefore, understanding the science of polarity underpinning the law of attraction and the law of repulsion through manipulating the electromagnetic energy is the phenomena of real magic. Accordingly, each person is a human talisman that can charge and discharge energy, transmitting sympathetically like human tuning forks. The main technique used is speech, which is why all magic is rooted in speech. Thus, it logically follows that music is the highest form of magic and magnetism. And so I really hope that this definition will elucidate all of the aspects that a person needs to understand to work with their personal magnetism. And I just wanted to briefly explain the last comment there about music being the highest form of magic and magnetism. As I already explained in the sympathetic vibrational tuning fork analogy with music, if you understand what this definition entails, you'll find that musicians are already doing everything in that definition. And that's why music is the highest form of magic and magnetism. But let's look at these ideas throughout history and see where they originated. Once I had formulated that definition, I started to research every book that I could get my hands on that would discuss these topics further, and one of those books that I had found was the book The Philosopher's Stone by Israel Regardie. And Israel Regardie is a very famous occultist during the 1900s. As we can see from the picture on the left-hand side of the screen, that is a picture of the table of contents, shows that the entirety of Book 2 is dedicated to discussing magnetism and magic in the mysteries. Regardie says that he was inspired by the writings of Marianne Atwood, who wrote a book called The Suggestive Inquiry into the Hermetic Mysteries, and that is an excellent book on the Hermetic science of magnetism. But if you have a chance, you should pause the video and read this quote here that really sums up what Regardie has to say about the use of personal magnetism in his book, The Philosopher's Stone. But another very famous occultist who was very influential on everyone who came after him, but except during the 1800s, is Eliphas Levi and his books, The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, as well as The Key of the Mystery. In part 2, chapter 18 of The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, he talks about magnetism. And then, as we can see from the picture on the right hand of the screen, it is a picture of the table of contents of The Key to the Mysteries. And in that table of contents, we can see that the part 3, first book, is dedicated entirely to the magnetic mysteries. And Eliphas Levi was very influential on pretty much everyone who came after him, from Blavatsky to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with Arthur Edward Waite translating most of his books, including the next book that we're going to discuss. He was even influential on people like Franz Bardon. In Levi's History of Magic, he traces the magical tradition back to the Magi of Persia, Chaldea, and Babylon. In page 56, he talks about how the Assyrian symbols in their statues represent the science of fire and the controlling of the electric and magnetic currents of the earth. Then he says verbatim, "To this same great secret of the Magi are referable all marvels of the Hermetic magic." Then in the next paragraph on page 56, he says that he's talking about the Chaldean oracles, even though he was just previously talking about the Assyrian statues. After this, I immediately got a copy of Ruth Majersik's translation, introduction, and commentary to the Chaldean oracles, pictured here on the bottom right. And in that, she talks about how the Chaldean oracles cannot be traced back any further than 150 AD to 200 AD, which does not take us all the way back to the historical time period of Babylon and Chaldea when these statues were actually in use. However, I don't want you to disregard what Levi says here. I quoted it for a reason, and I would like you to consider what he says as we talk about the ideas in the rest of the video. However, the next person was influential on Levi. Francis Barrett and his publication, The Magus, was something that was read by Levi, and since I knew that, I decided to get a copy of the Magus for myself. And lo and behold, in book 2, it's entirely dedicated to the account of magnetism. And the occult magnetism is defined by an attraction of two or more people to one another. The various potions and cantations and other practices used to draw people together or apart are listed with some considerations given to witchcraft. And this book, although is a good book, is known to have plagiarized a lot of material from Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, which we will deal with in a second. But another very famous person who really was the popularizer of the idea of magnetism was a man now named Anton Mesmer, who published a book called Mesmerism in the late 1700s. Anton Mesmer is really famous and very influential to the point that he even added words to our language, which is where we get the term mesmerism and mesmerized. It's because of his last name. His publication is where we get the term animal magnetism, as he was really known for his experiments with the occult and specifically hypnotism. But due to the fact that I had known that Francis Barrett had plagiarized a lot of material from Cornelius Agrippa, I decided to check out that source next to see if there was any material referencing the ideas of magnetism or magnets. Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy has been extremely influential since its publication in 1531. In the first 2 chapters of book 1 that set up the theory and definition of magic used in the rest of the book, he references the ideas of occult virtues. And here, as you can see on screen, I've defined virtue. It means an advantage or a benefit received from something, and this is the same idea that we just encountered with Francis Barrett, who was talking about occult sympathies, and this is the same idea that I was expressing in my definition earlier about the sympathetic transmission. And so a perfect quote to really emphasize what Agrippa is trying to say is much later in the book on page 330. He gives an excellent description of how occult virtues is really the power behind symbols and sigils on papers or other images. And then he says, very surprisingly, that this occult virtue works through sympathy, just like when you pluck a harp, other strings on that harp that you did not pluck will start vibrating exactly like the tuning fork analogy that I gave previously, which is absolutely amazing to find that he had the exact understanding that I produced in my definition. However, I did not read this when I wrote my definition. I had only found this after I started researching my definition to further understand what I had produced. And in that regard, this is really a perfect summary of what Agrippa has to say. Personally, it's really hard to read. I would actually recommend the Eric Purdue translation if you can get your hands on it, although it is a lot more expensive. And so really, what he says here is almost exactly what I was trying to express in my definition on magic. But actually, very surprisingly, we can trace the idea of magnetism to a much earlier source, because I did not find a reference to the word magnets or magnetism in 3 Books of Occult Philosophy by Agrippa. And that source is Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, also known as Paracelsus. He was very famous for being influential in spreading alchemy and chemistry throughout Europe. Usually the name for Paracelsian alchemy is spagyrics. In this book written by Franz Hartmann, published in 1887, Franz Hartmann makes the claim that Paracelsus, not Mesmer, is the original popularizer of the animal magnetism that Anton Mesmer later popularizes. Franz Hartmann, if you didn't know, is the leader of the German Theosophical Society at the time of publishing this book. And I think that it is really important to note that Paracelsus is a contemporary of Agrippa, and they were both popularizing the ideas of Hermeticism, magic, and alchemy in the same exact area that the Rosicrucian tracts were published in. Which brings us to the Hermetica, one of the most influential texts throughout history, as I'm sure you guys already know. This text also mentions the same exact ideas about magnetism on page 17 of the Copenhagen edition, as you can see the quote on screen, because this is a perfect example of the reason this series of videos is called the Hermetic Science of Personal Magnetism. Let's go through the quote really quick. Such then taught is God's image, as best as I have been able to sketch it for you. If your vision of it is sharp, and you understand it with the eyes of your heart, believe me, child, you shall discover the road that leads above, or rather, the image itself will show you the way. For the vision of it has a special property. It takes hold of those who have had the vision and draws them up, just as the magnet stone draws iron. I was very surprised to find this reference to magnets in the Hermetica, especially since the printing of the Hermetica sparked a renaissance, or in Latin, ad fontes, in English, back to the sources. Most occult groups in the Western world throughout history are solely based on Hermetic philosophy, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So to find that it has references to the use of magnets and magnetism in its theory and practice is absolutely astounding. What's just as amazing is that the ideas haven't really changed much, because the use of magnetism in the Hermetica is exactly what the practice of theurgy is supposed to do when we practice visualization with such things as the Kabbalistic tree of life while doing pathworking and other similar practices. This is in every way the same teachings that Oliver St. John talks about when he says using the horizontal polarity with the Logos meditation method on images to have mystical experiences. Because, of course, in the Hermetica, they're talking about having mystical experiences of the mind of the universe. And this quote necessarily means that everything I teach on this channel can demonstrably be traced back through history to the original source of Hermetic philosophy, the Hermetica. But there's actually an even earlier source than the Hermetica that I would like to share with you guys, that I was even more surprised to find references to the same philosophy of magnets and magnetism, and that is Plato. But before I do that, I wanted to add the last bullet point here, which is that the Hermetica was published in the late 1400s, which predates Agrippa and Paracelsus, who we just saw were popularizers of these ideas of magnetism. And so I really think that due to the fact that Paracelsus and Agrippa were known to have been influenced by Hermetic philosophy, they were very clearly trying to pass on this tradition of the Hermetic science of personal magnetism. And I don't know if Paracelsus was influenced by Plato, but we definitely know that in the 3 books of occult philosophy published by Agrippa, he mentions Plato and the Platonic dialogues, which I will reference here as having the same philosophy of Agrippa regarding the teachings of personal magnetism. Since they were written nearly 2,400 years ago, I would argue that Plato's dialogues have been the most influential document written in recorded human history. Many people don't know that Plato's works have been completely unavailable for study in Europe except a bad translation of the Timaeus since the outlaw of paganism in 529 AD, due to the fact that the pagan gods are mentioned in the works of these philosophers like Plato. But from the 1400s onwards, the dialogue had been reintroduced into European society. Marsilio Ficino, who we'd just been talking about, was working on the Platonic dialogues and translating them into Latin when he was interrupted with a request for the translation of the Hermetica. So it is incredible that the Platonic philosophy discusses the exact same philosophy regarding magnets and magnetism as the Hermetica, since they both entered European history at the same exact time. Let's look at some of the quotes in the dialogue called the Ion, because we can clearly trace the idea of personal magnetism to approximately 300 BC. Now, Plato does not say the exact words personal magnetism, but the translator might as well have. Let's take a look at the first sentence quoted here. Socrates says to Ion, "As I said earlier, that's not a subject you've mastered. Speaking well about Homer, it's a divine power that moves you, as a magnetic stone moves iron rings." And this is exactly what we were saying earlier when we defined personal magnetism earlier in the video. We said that a lot of people really consider it to be charisma and personal interestingness, all of those synonyms, personal energy, captivating, charming, etc. And that's really what Plato is saying in these 2 quotes from the Ion. And he even goes further and says that divination, poetry, rhetoric, and music are all based on the principles of magnetism, which is truly astounding. He even says, according to this translator, by virtue of the magnet, which is really the exact same thing that Agrippa was saying earlier with the occult virtues. And really, that's also what I was trying to express in my definition as well. But Plato, according to the biography written by Olympiodorus, learned from the Magi. And so right now, I would like to show you what I found while researching the Magi, because I think that it is truly incredible and astounding what I found. Throughout my research, I found many references to the Persian, Chaldean, and Babylonian Magi. In the New Testament, it's actually pronounced Magoi. That's the word that is used in reference to the 3 kings, the 3 wise men, and the 3 Magi. But it's also pronounced Magi, like in the Netflix show, Magi and Magi. And so when I heard all of these references to the Chaldean Magi, the Persian Magi, the Babylonian Magi, I decided to get a book on the historically accurate magic of these people. And luckily, I was able to find Chaldean magic and its origin and development. And in this book, I found some absolutely incredible information that really connects Hermeticism to the tradition of the Chaldean Magi. In the first chapter alone, there are 28 incantations, and every single one of these incantations ends with the phrase, "Spirit of the heavens conjure it, spirit of the earth conjure it." Here on the left side of the screen, you can see the incantation number 18 for yourself so that you can understand and read it. But to me, this is absolutely incredible because this is proof of what Eliphas Levi was saying in the history of magic in regards to the fact that the great tradition of the Magi became the great tradition of Hermeticism. It was absorbed into it along with all of the other traditions that Hermeticism absorbed. And in that regard, although I didn't find any specific references to magnets and magnetism, I do really think that the Chaldean Magi were teaching about magnetism in especially to people like Plato. And let me read a quote really quickly to give you a little background information. The name magnet given to the lodestone or natural magnet was bestowed by the ancients because the observed properties of the lodestone resembled the mental power of the magi or esoteric priesthood of ancient Persia, Media, Babylon, and Chaldea. These priests were the magi or the wise men of the East who had developed wonderful meditative powers and who were known as wonder workers. The word magic comes from the word magi, as I'm sure you can see the similarities. When the attracting power and quality of induction of the lodestone was noticed, it was remarked that the physical phenomenon closely resembled the mental phenomenon of the Magi, and therefore the lodestone was called the Magian stone, or the magic stone, which sprung the terms magnet and magnetism. As the centuries rolled by and the Western world had its attention called to the mysterious phenomena of mesmerism in the 18th century, it was instinctively connected with the phenomena of magnetism, and the terms animal magnetism, personal magnetism, etc. came into general use. And these terms persist to this day as we hear the terms very magnetic, lacking magnetism, magnetic personality, etc., as applied to people. The magnet, which took its name because its properties resembled the phenomena resulting from the use of meditative influence by the Magi, gave a name to mental manifestations resembling those of the Magi in the dim past. The magnet gives us modern Magi the name it borrowed from the Magi of ancient Persia and Chaldea. This is an interesting bit of occult history that is little known to the general public. And this is coming from William Walker Atkinson's Complete Collection, Volume Number 2, page 494. And so what I would like to argue is that these people did have the science of magnetism in their magic because, as we can see from the historical and archaeological evidence left by all cultures, not just the Babylonian, Akkadian, Chaldean, and Persians, that the magical philosophy of these cultures was based on sympathy, the ideas that we've already discussed in this video. At this point, I hope I have proven to the viewer that there is a tradition that dates back to ancient times that all of the famous adepts throughout history have learned from. And I would also like to differentiate this tradition from some of the more modern approaches to occultism that do not necessarily learn the objective interpretation of the symbols. And I would necessarily call that an over-intellectualization of the symbol. I find many people, once they learn about esotericism and that it's about interpreting symbols, they immediately over-intellectualize the symbol. And I chose two examples here, Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics on the left and the Four Elements on the right. In Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics, he talks about the objective interpretation of the mysteries. For example, he says water is magnetism and water is the magnetic fluid, the water element in Western occultism. While the Four Elements book over here on the right says that water represents openness and receptivity. And so I'd really like to make this clear that it is absolutely essential that we understand why the objective interpretation makes it a science. Do you know why we wash dishes with water? We wash dishes with water because it's magnetic. Because when you're washing the dishes, it magnetically attracts the stuff off of whatever you're washing. And that's how water works. And that is a science. Now, if you were to read this book, The Four Elements, I'm sure that you could become a better person. You could participate in self improvement. I definitely know some people who need to be more receptive and more open in their life, and I'm not deriding that in any way, shape, or form. That's a good thing. But I would like to differentiate between what I would like to teach and what these adepts have taught throughout history, since we're clearly teaching the same tradition. And I would like to differentiate that from those people who are not teaching this tradition, because I will be coming out with a lot more videos in this series. The first video that I will be coming out with is energy cultivation. The next video that I will be coming out with is polarity. And I don't know what the order is after that. I will decide as I make the videos. If you have any video requests, let me know in the comments. Like I said at the beginning, I will be breaking down all of the individual aspects of these rituals and ceremonies. And then once I've broken it all down, then I will do a video putting it all together so that everyone can see the parts and the whole. And on top of that, I will also be doing videos on recommendations for books that people might be interested if they're interested. One more thing I'd like to add is that I will be providing an in-depth understanding of the physics and the metaphysics behind what I'm trying to explain, as well as respond to counter-arguments. So if you have anything that you would like to say, please put it in the comments and I will address it in future videos. Even if it's not a counter argument, if it's something that you didn't understand in the video and you want me to further explain so that it will help you and other viewers understand that particular aspect, please let me know in the comments. And when I come out with future videos, I will make sure to address those ideas. But for the last part of the video, I would just like to recommend these books on screen. For the most part, you can check out any of the books that I have shown throughout this video, but I would really like to highlight these books are the best books that I can really bring to everyone. Honestly, every single book throughout this video is really from an adept, a individual who is really proficient in their studies. But for the most part, I would say that if you read these books by William Walker Atkinson, Franz Bardone, and Karl von Attgarshausen, they are truly phenomenal, and they really do stand out among the many other books that stand out among all of the books on occultism and magic. In the first part of the video, we defined our terms to present a philosophically and scientifically tenable definition for magic and introduce the different parts of the definition that we will be studying to become magicians or just successful energy users with our daily personal magnetism. In the second part of the video, we traced the ideas of personal magnetism throughout history and connected to the tradition of the Magi with the tradition of Hermetic philosophy, which brought us to some very interesting and astounding places. I think I have presented the evidence needed to reach my burden of proof for both of these things. Finally, if you think this video has helped you understand magic, please share the video because I want to help people on their path, both in average everyday scenarios as well as during ceremonies and magic rituals. And if you share the video, it can help other people just like it helped you. Also, please subscribe to the channel because this is only the first video in the series, as I am clearly going to be making a bunch more. And so I will do my best to make each video the same quality as this video or even better. So stay tuned for those future videos on book recommendations and lessons on personal magnetism. Until then, have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Mystery School channel.